Wikileaks. So I want to do my analysis of the Assange situation, him being arrested. And it's a long story. If you followed WikiLeaks over the years, you kind of have a rough idea of what was going on. But I have to say that I kind of have changed my mind. I was wrong because when WikiLeaks was first on the scene, it was a lot of stuff that was kind of a joke. You know, it wasn't really a serious leak engine that I could make sense of. And then over time, it kind of got more and more hardcore. So I think that if you knew about the history of the cyberpunks and the background of Assange, there was a lot to be dubious about. But what happened in the course of the last few years, I think, has really changed my take on WikiLeaks. Or maybe not so much WikiLeaks as Assange himself. I think Assange was sincerely trying to do journalism and do leaks. And perhaps after the period of Assange being stuck in Ecuador, there was usage of WikiLeaks as a kind of a cutout or a limited hangout or something like that, because a lot of different groups can use these things. Like if you think about something like Anonymous, right? What is that? Well, it's just a cutout. It could be a lot of different groups. And we saw that recently with the integrity leaks under the guise of Anonymous. But in the case of WikiLeaks and subsequently after WikiLeaks, we've seen this rise of the leak engines, everything from the staged Panama Papers, which is a controlled leak engine, to many other examples of these leak engines, even perhaps to the degree of something like 4chan with Q and QAnon and all that as a controlled kind of leak engine for the administration. What's curious about the Assange situation is that, yes, you could look at the background of him in this weird cult or whatever, but really that doesn't mean much to the present day situation of WikiLeaks, I don't think, because what became evident was that when he was leaking things that were anti-Bush, anti-W, weapons of mustard gases and weapons of mass destruction, then he was a good guy. He was a darling to the media. And when he was honest about other things, like the problems in the Democratic establishment, and we had this whole fiasco the last few years of the collusion and all of that collapsing, especially after the Mueller report, all of which, of course, I talked about. I did a video 2.5, 3 years ago that said this was all manufactured, it was all fake. I did a whole video on Vault 7. That was the big issue. Vault 7 showed the ability to spoof things on the part of the CIA. And that's when he became an enemy of the mainstream left media, was when he leaked, right? WikiLeaks gets information. There's no proof, no evidence that this was from Russian hackers. This is from the Russian hack with WikiLeaks. We get Jay Dyer send email to Democrat didn't connect to WikiLeaks. This is literally the kind of crap that people were saying. That like even I was involved in this nonsense, which is absurd. Because if you talk to a certain person, if you talk to Dugan, if you talk to this person, if you had any which you could string together an internet media connection between anybody, we're all Kevin Bacon. We are all Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan and Kevin Bacon are 1 degree of separation via the internet, which is completely absurd. The DMT Clockwork Elves are 1 dimension away from us, because we're in that dimension, man. But now, seriously, when it comes to Assange, I think I was wrong. I think that he was serious. And the fact that he's now being arrested, the fact that the whole establishment is not backing him up, even though obviously the WikiLeaks that relate to the emails, Clinton emails, they obviously helped Trump. And Trump has surprisingly said, I don't know who that is. Who's Julian Assange? Never heard. I don't know who it is. Which is obviously not true. Of course he knows who Julian Assange is. He knows what WikiLeaks is. I haven't heard of it. Trump kind of does this, I think, when anything controversial comes up. He says, I've never heard of it. Right? It's like you could ask Trump about Trump. Who's Donald Trump? Never heard of him. I don't know who that is. I'm kidding. But this is obviously not true. Of course he knows who Julian Assange is. Of course he's familiar with WikiLeaks and the Clinton email scenario. How many times did Trump talk about your emails? Where are your emails? Where are the emails? So I think what happened was the Vault 7 was the key thing that turned the fake left establishment against him, when previously the fake right establishment was against him. And so now the fake left and the fake right, and even Trump and company who benefited from the leaks, since they see that it's a hot button issue, there's nobody that's going to be on Julian Assange's side here. And even when it comes to the Chelsea Bradley Manning stuff, I'm dubious about that too. But regardless of that stuff, the Vault 7 stuff is pretty crucial. And that's why I did a video on it. I think my video even got put into like a limited state or something, or I know it was at least demonetized. I don't know beyond that, but it was so obvious what was going on here with Vault 7 and this spoofing of the Russian hackers, the Chinese hackers, and all this stuff. When it's just the CIA and big tech and these agencies are able to spoof all this stuff. And it became very evident with Vault 7. And again, that was the key issue that made Assange no longer favorable to the fake right or to the fake left. And that's, I think, why he's being arrested. Now, you could talk about all the other questionable issues like Pamela Anderson visiting Assange. What the heck, dude? I don't know. That sounds Hollywood. It sounds like a complete bunch of nonsense. But again, a lot of these actors and actresses, as I pointed out at Jay's analysis, they have a different role other than just B-movie actress or pseudo porn star actress or porn star actress. They actually at times work for intelligence agencies. So maybe she was some kind of conduit of information. I don't know. But regardless, whatever you think of WikiLeaks, and I wouldn't trust WikiLeaks and as an organization, it's just a cutout. I do think Assange has tried to expose things. And what does it demonstrate here? Well, on the one hand, yes, it demonstrates the death of the fourth estate and the media keeping everybody honest, which we've kind of figured out really died a long time ago. I mean, Quigley talks about this not being the case 100 years ago. The richest families in America essentially owned all of the top media companies 100 years ago. So only a person who really bought into the Enlightenment perspective that there is really neutrality and that we can all just be unbiased and this kind of stuff, that's really the only people who would think that the Fourth Estate really function in that way. And to a degree, yes, there have been time periods and decades where journalists have really exposed stories, where there really were people calling out the establishment. But it's always within a very narrow paradigm. It's always within a paradigm which is not ever going to really shake up or change the system. Now, I don't think necessarily that Assange was literally going to shake up the system and all this kind of stuff. But I do think that the leaks, because they were legitimate in regard to Vault 7, or if you look at something like the integrity leaks, they really do show how the system works. And that's what makes those leaks particularly dangerous. The old WikiLeaks stuff of 7-8 years ago of sorority and fraternity rituals, that's nothing. Although, by the way, it does show that they're quasi-Masonic, which I've said for a long time. And there was a good leak that came out many years ago of a psychological warfare handbook on the part of the military from WikiLeaks. So there have been some gems in the midst of this. And then I realized too, well, you could say, well, what about the fact that Assange never went into the big event from the year 2000 plus one? He never explained that event, and he always shied away from it. And I always thought, well, that made him a little bit dubious. But actually, when you think about it from a tactical perspective, now I understand why he didn't go into that, because he knew, I think, that any talk of that kind of a nature, of any of that kind of a subject matter in a significant way, in a real analytical way, would skew the perception of Assange. It would completely destroy his perception. So he's being, I think, kind of thrown under the bus here, which I think is unfortunate. Doesn't mean that I think that he's good. I saw him one of the things that I would criticize him for was he was pandering to these really degenerate leftist people like Peter Singer, right, who calls for heavy petting with your pets and other such nastiness. But I think the reason he was doing that was that he was trying to gain left appeal. So he was reaching out to perceived liberal figureheads, moral philosophers, more like immoral degenerates. And I think that was a big mistake, because you can't really, if you're going to play the game of conservative versus liberal, you kind of have to be consistent with it. You can't constantly attack both sides and then appeal to both sides. And I think that he was still trying to play between the false idea of neutrality, of a real position between right and left. And you really can't do that, because if you anger both of those administrations, really what you're the left and the right, the Democrat, the Republican, what you're angering is the power that sits above both of those groups. And so then what happens is that Assange, I think, finds himself kind of just having to appeal to the mass audience, but the internet is structured such that they can now shut down appeals to masses and to a broader spectrum beyond a two-party duopoly in a controlled structure like that. So it is unfortunate, and what it signifies, I think, is really not just the death of Fourth Estate, 1980s New York Times, Boston Globe style media. It signifies the death of the power and ability of the leak engine to do a whole lot. I mean, it can be a targeted thing, a limited hangout thing. I'm not saying that Julian himself was a limited hangout, but I think WikiLeaks ultimately shows itself to be ineffectual in what it attempts to do. It is doing the work of what journalism used to do. But unfortunately, in the postmodern era, journalism doesn't matter. And journalism hasn't mattered for a long time, because journalism is predicated on reality not being perceived in the postmodern way. It's predicated on reality being perceived by the masses as a logical, rational, reasonable, empirical thing. And in a sense, it is that. But when most people don't perceive it that way, it no longer functions. This is Jay Dyer from Jay's Analysis. Thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe, like, share if you enjoy this content. And let's hope that there will be some actual justice for Assange, because he certainly doesn't deserve to be thrown away into a prison. He looked kind of like an Amish, Julian Assange, when he comes out of his hole there, kind of a Unabomber type of look. So hopefully he's not going to have to be confined to something like solitary confinement or the death penalty. So we can hope that there will be justice in this regard. But I don't know, we'll have to wait and see. I think it signifies that we most definitely live in a totally postmodern period. If you like this analysis, be sure to click subscribe and give me a thumbs up down below. Also, be sure to check out Jay's Analysis and definitely click the bell down below to be sure you get the updates